Okay, this is part 2 of the video lecture on who is morally significant. Why did I cut it into 2 parts? Unintentionally. The technology failed me. So I was talking about the Merchant of Venice, right? This wonderful speech given by the Jew Shylock. If you cut me, do I not bleed? If you poison me, do I not die? Hath not a Jew, and he goes on to list the various things that make a Jew human, make any person human. And does not a Jew, in fact, have all these things? It's said that in certain 19th century actors, I'm thinking primarily of Booth, John Wilkes Booth's brother, Edwin Booth, who could literally bring people to tears. So sympathetic was he making the character in this speech. Hath not a Jew eyes? Hath not a Jew ears? If you cut me, do I not bleed? If you poison me, do I not die? If you wrong me, will I not want revenge? In other words, you know what? I'm just like you. I ought to be treated just like you. And I ought to be given the same privileges that you are given. Okay. Jean-Paul Sartre's introduction to Frantz Fanon's The Wretched of the Earth is a classic essay on colonialism, but he also wrote a book-length essay called Jew and Anti-Semite, which is worth looking at, not just for the particular issue of anti-Semitism, but simply because he talks about all sorts of scapegoat. I'll try that again. Scapegoating as being what Sartre calls bad faith. Okay, bad faith. You're not arguing in good faith. That means that you're not sincere. Okay, how is it bad faith? Well, Sartre says it is the human condition that there is much uncertain, that there may be a need to change one's point of view, change one's conclusions, that we may have to realize the incompleteness of our knowledge of any situation. The anti-Semite is, this can be said true of anyone who is engaging in scapegoating and making others morally insignificant. You're evil, you're my scapegoat, you're evil, you're responsible for all these things that are wrong, and so I don't have to take you seriously as a moral agent. I'm acting out of passion, but as Sartre points out, usually when we say people are acting out of passion, we think they're acting out of love of this or love of that, but the anti-Semite and his analogs are acting out of the passion of hatred. And they want a stable target at which to direct their hatred. The solidity of a stone, says Sartre. Okay? He flees his own insecurities through the solidity of, if you will, this unshakable dogma. An unshakable dogma. Something I can pretend I can hang on to, even though I have to essentially pretend something is solid when it's not solid. That something is unquestionable when it is questionable. That something is true when I have no good reason to believe that it's true. But it suits me emotionally. And hence I have this hierarchy. Now, returning to Kant. And not for criticism either. Kant says, my sentiments ought not to enter into the question of how I treat you. It is not morality when I treat someone well because it pleases me to do so and treat someone badly because that pleases me. If I treat you well just because it pleases me to do so, I'm going to treat you badly when that pleases me. One thing that we notice talking about hierarchies and who is morally significant and who is not morally significant, think about Weston's expanding circle and think about what happens when that expanding circle just halts, fossilizes at a very early stage. You probably know people who are like this. It's like, who is morally significant to me? Well, maybe my family and a few of my friends, and I'll treat them fairly, and I care what happens to them. But others, they can drop dead. I don't care. Why should I treat them fairly? They're not my relatives. I don't even know them. Why should I treat them fairly? Well, Confucius and others would say that, in fact, the moral fabric of our world requires that we hold on to principles of fairness and that we treat everyone as being fair. Well, I don't have any obligation to be fair to you if you're not morally significant. Okay, so remember Rawls' veil of ignorance. Okay, if I'm going to say some state of affairs, some way of making judgments, some principle of judgment is acceptable, I have to be willing to do that without regard to where I'm going to fall in the scheme of things. If I say, yeah, it's perfectly all right just to give special privileges to your friends and your family, what the heck? I ought to be able to do that. What if you're the one on the getting the short end of the stick? I knew someone who worked at a hospital, and a meeting was called of all the clerical workers. And the head of accounting said that, okay, I'm retiring, and the last thing that I'm going to do is appoint my successor. And there were a number of people who had been working in accounting at that hospital for years and thought, I'm really qualified. I know the institution. I've shown that I can really do the work. So the head of accounting promptly announced that she was appointing her son, who had never worked for the hospital, who is fresh out of college with his accounting degree. Well, I'm appointing my son. People were infuriated. And her response was, well, wouldn't you do the same for your son? Now, when I heard that story, I thought, obviously you obviously think you're doing the right thing, but obviously you have no morals. Okay. Yeah, I can be fair to my son, but at the cost of being unfair to a large number of people. In fact, to a large number of people to whom I have some manner of social obligation or professional obligation. And actually, I'm not even being fair to my son. I'm giving him a special privilege. People almost always want to say that their privilege is something that they earned. I'm a white male American born in the 20th century, living in modern times. I have all kinds of privileges. Now, there have been times when I have just had very, very, very difficult struggles. But I know perfectly well that even if I had to run that race, there were other people who were, basically I got to start at the 50-yard line. And there were other people who had to start in the dugout. And if they tried to get out of the dugout, other people were throwing rocks at them. Okay. What does privilege mean? I personally do not like the term privilege because privilege sounds like you're getting unearned benefits. And it's usually a matter of someone else. When people say something like white privilege or male privilege, it's usually not a matter of that so much as other people who don't belong to your group aren't getting their rights. I don't have to worry about, getting shot on sight if I'm if I'm stopped by a police officer in certain parts of the country, in certain neighborhoods. I don't have to worry. Geez, he might for no reason at all pull his gun and kill me. Is that a privilege? No, it's a right. And it's not that I have a privilege, it's that you are being deprived of your rights, and that's a much more serious matter. If I get all kinds of benefits that you don't get, to which we all might be entitled, but I get them and you don't, because of some arbitrary advantage that I'm given, you're being deprived of your rights. Being deprived of your rights says you are not morally significant. Or maybe I'm just more significant than you are, because that usually is a matter of some sort of class identity. Okay, so of course what I want you to do is to answer the question using all these materials that we're looking at today. Are you morally significant? And if so, what makes you morally significant? And using those elements, judging by those elements by which you consider yourself morally significant, then are there groups, are there individuals, are there people within our society, are there people in the world who you are judging to be morally insignificant? Currently, there is a woman being considered for the Supreme Court, and people are worried about maybe her religious views will interfere with her ability to do her job. And there are others who are adamantly saying her religion should not be an issue. And yet many of these same people were, totally going off the deep end that a Muslim woman is serving in Congress. Well, why is the one person's religion not an appropriate issue, but the other person's religion is an issue? Could that be privilege? And is privilege not predicated on the idea that some people are just not as significant as others? Embedded in our Constitution is a balance between two principles. I'll return to this idea later in the course. One is the sovereignty of the individual, and the other is democracy, which means the will of the majority rules. Particularly when we talk about John Stuart Mill and the principle of harm, we'll go more deeply into this. But essentially, there are two principles that are at tension here. One, Kant was right. No one may be arbitrarily deprived of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That is the right to life, the right to self-actualization, or to attempt at self-actualization, the right to autonomy. That means there are limits to what the majority can decide. They must respect certain fundamental rights of the individual. Why? Because individuals are morally significant. On the other hand, the individual can't use individualism as an excuse for doing things that are destructive to the community, because the community is also morally significant. Okay, now as I say, we will look more closely at that principle when we study John Stuart Mill, who we will study under the utilitarianism module. And okay, I made a sort of a promise to a friend. I noticed the other day, looking at some of my more recent videos, that on the shelf behind me, right under Inari-sama, the fox god, Japanese fox god, and Wakizashi, short sword, right here are the novels of my friend Sonali Dev. So I'm very honored to call my friend. I pointed out to her, I didn't plan it this way, but I guess I'm kind of plugging your novels in my at least my most recent philosophy lectures. I have them all stacked up on a shelf behind me. Her response was, "I love it." Well, okay. I hope that you'll give some serious thought to this. If there were a handful of things I want you to carry away from this course, one of them is the serious consideration of the question of who is morally significant and why. And the best way to begin is to ask yourself, why do you consider yourself entitled to be considered morally significant? Well, by quality of reasoning, that would mean that you have to consider others morally significant as well. Okay,